Rules.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, Crawford.
Good morning.
So we don't have anyone from outside of, everyone here is familiar with everyone. And so there's no need for introductions. I think we should probably just move right in to our agenda. First of all, welcome and introductions and announcements. And Monique is not here with us this morning, but we're honored to have Miss Patrice Gilroy, and our Miss. Thank you, Patrice, for showing up for us and helping support this subcommittee meeting, program and services.
And Ozzy, if I might, it's actually Guillory, but it's okay. I get that often. And I do have one announcement, if I may.
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. So all CAB members, if you haven't checked your email as of yesterday, you all should have received a notice from me indicating the changes that are afoot regarding all public advisory body, well, all public meetings, but in particular, all of our advisory body meetings will be moving to in-person meetings. We are working really diligently here at the probation department to provide a hybrid option where members from the public can still join in via Zoom. However, a quorum of all of the advisory bodies, including their respective subcommittees, would have to be, those members would have to be in person. So this will begin starting it for your March meetings. I did indicate that if you all could send either myself or Monique an email letting me know whether or not you can still make at least the full body meeting for March, which is March 9th, I believe, from 10 to 12 here at our location at 50 Douglas Drive in Martinez, okay? We're gonna try, because we know that this is quite a bit of a transition for folks, and we have all been spoiled, right, by the convenience of Zoom meetings. We will do our absolute best to work with you guys. If we need to reschedule the meeting cadences, that would accommodate members being able to meet in person. We will, so that we can maintain quorum. We are more than happy to make adjustments where we can. But just so you know, for now, all of the program and services subcommittee meetings have been scheduled, in our large room here at 50 Douglas has been reserved for you guys to meet here. If in the event you feel like this can't be done, this conflicts with my work schedule, what have you, we can certainly look or poll you guys and start to look at a different meeting time if need be. But yeah, we'll just take it meeting by meeting to see how it works for folks. You guys' next meeting is actually March 16th from 11 a.m. to 12:30. Again, that would likely be held here at 50 Douglas Martinez Drive, 50 Douglas Drive here in Martinez. If that time and date does not work for you to meet here in person, let me know, and then we'll start to work with you guys to figure out how we can go about changing a date or time that will work with folks, okay? So please bear with us as we're easing through this transition, and we will do our absolute best to accommodate you guys as best as we can. Also, please be sure to review the document that was attached to that email. It is the county council's sort of overview of the guidelines that are set around public meetings. It will have an impact on your participation. So please read through those as in depth as you can. And then whatever questions you might have that come up for you, let me know. We can also schedule some time to talk it through and things of that nature. So sorry for that very long-winded announcement, Ozzy, but I felt that it was critically important as we all will have to start making some adjustments to continue our engagement.
Thank you for that, Patrice. Are there any other announcements? Seeing none, we'll move to the approval of minutes from the January 26th Program and Services Subcommittee meeting. That's attachment 1. Hopefully, we've had time to review that prior to the meeting. And we're looking for a motion for the approval and a second. Rena, did you make a motion for approval? You were breaking up a little.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll do the motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Rena Moore has made
No
a
problem.
motion for the approval of the minutes. Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you. Minutes have been voted for an approval. Well, we're going to vote. They've been motion to approve and second has been presented. So now we'll have a roll call for approval.
Sure. Ozzy,
Aye.
Latanya,
Aye.
Rena,
Aye.
and motion carries.
Passed unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, which was a request by Ms. Latanya that we review the 2022 policy, program and services survey. That's attachment 2. Basically, from what we've done in the past, this is the survey and its findings. And primarily the reason why we're revisiting it is because it's our responsibility as program and services to look over the questions and determine if we need to add anything. Also, take a look at the responses and have some discussions around that. So has everyone had an opportunity to review the survey? And if so, are there any questions? I know for myself, I guess I'll just open up the dialogue. For myself, in looking at the participation and the number of respondents that actually responded to the survey. And my concern at this particular junction is how we can get more response. And Patrice, you can add more to this, my memory. I'm understanding that we've actually had more responding in 2022 than before. There was some additional encouragement and additional mentioning at specific meetings to kind of encourage AB 109 recipients to kind of really respond. And I just would like, if Patrice, could you give a little history on the survey and the response and where we are? And specifically, I would like to know, I know I could go back and get the number of agencies and community-based organizations that are actually receiving funding, but I'd also like to just get a numeric value so we can kind of determine who's responding and who's not, and maybe why we're not getting the responses that we're wanting.
Sure. So the general overview that you gave was correct. In the past, CAB, through programs and services, have requested feedback from AB 109 funded agencies, both county agencies and the CBO contracted providers, whom are funded through you guys' budget request for community programs. And for a few years, predominantly the contracted CBOs would respond overwhelmingly. It would be the county agencies where we saw not as many responses coming through. So the actual number, and I believe is here on the page, the respondents. So 17 individuals representing 15 organizations. That's the number of folks who responded to the survey, but they're responding as a representative of that agency. So the intention wasn't necessarily to have so many individuals within a given agency to respond, but rather have an agency representative response to the survey. So that's why those numbers may appear to be low when you typically think about surveying, sort of like a broad number of folks. This was to represent that particular agency's feedback or thoughts regarding the services that are provided, that are funded through AB 109. So here for this particular survey, you see that we have all of the community-based organizations that are providing reentry services. That's Bay Area Legal Aid, that provides civil legal aid services, Centroforce, which provides family reunification services, Lao Family Community Development, and Shelter Inc., whom at the time both were housing providers, Men and Women of Purpose, which provides peer mentoring support for West County specifically, and then our 2 reentry service hubs, which are the Reentry Success Center and the Reentry Network that is operated by Health Right 360. And then of the county agencies, we have Workforce Development Board, which is a subset of our county's Employment and Human Services departments, and Alcohol and Other Drugs, again, a unit within our county health department, Public Defender's Office, Sheriff's Office, local MET Police Department. MET stands for the Mental Health Evaluation Team. So these are individual officers that receive, or individual police departments that receive AB 109 funding to have a officer dedicated to responding to mental health crises or calls of mental health crisis, and they then go out in the community with the clinician to respond to that,
Patrice,
call.
Patrice, can I just correct you on that?
Sure. Sure. You went on mute.
I did, because I was swallowing.
Oh, chewing. Okay, no
Trying
problem.
to quickly eat something between meetings. The MET team is actually not, the MET program is actually not a crisis response. The mental health evaluation team goes out after a crisis and they follow up and they make sure that the individual and family are connected to resources. So they are completely different from the A3 program, which is being developed, which is expanding on our current crisis response system, which is available to both children and adults, which is a completely different system run out of a different program and different funding.
So just so I'm hearing you correctly, you're correcting me, because I'm learning here, you're correcting me in the sense that the Met officer only, it's responding to calls that they may get regarding,
No, it's after an event.
oh,
So
after a crisis.
Once a
event.
5150 happens, so somebody calls in crisis, that person is either 5150 or that person is 5150. Then the Met officers respond afterwards to the family and the individual to make sure that they are connected with services. So it's a follow-up. It's not an in-crisis response. The Met officers also go out and train other departments, other cities, like our Central County Met program trained Moraga on crisis response and that sort of thing, but they're not a crisis response unit.
Got it. Thank you. So that nuance is really important. So in case you guys caught that. And so through the AB 109 funding for Met officers, it's funding 3 departments right now. That would be Pittsburgh Police Department. It used to be Walnut Creek. I think it's San Ramon, or the other way around. And Richmond PD. Okay. Health, housing, and homeless services, which we often refer to as H3. Again, another division within our county health department. They provide homeless services just broadly for the county, but they're receiving AB 109 resources to cover the cost of shelter beds, emergency shelter beds for folks within this population. And then we have the district attorney's office. Okay, so those are the respondents or the agencies with the representative who responded to this particular survey. Did I answer your questions, Ozzy?
Yes, but I do have another question. So these are the ones that responded. Who did not respond is another question.
That's a good question. I want to say,
So I was just looking through the list, Patrice, because I was curious about that too, because I know that this is a very robust response this time around. And I know detention health and behavioral health didn't respond.
yes.
But beyond that, I don't know all of the, there is a whole variety of, let's see, it looks like Office of Ed didn't respond either. But I'm not sure that they get any funding through this or through the Sheriff's Department.
Yeah, they get funding through the sheriff's office. So that would be correct.
So this looks like a pretty robust response list from direct AB 109 funding.
Yes.
Okay, are there any other questions from the other board members that might want to do a little more in depth as far as the respondents? And before we move on to taking a look at the specific questions on the survey?
Ozzy, would you like me to go to the questions that were asked in the survey? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, but I do have one other question. I don't see Rubicon on this list, and I just wanted to, do they get funding, AB 109 funding?
No, you're right. Yeah, so we don't have a Rubicon employment response. Now, the Reentry Success Center is operated by Rubicon as well. I'm not certain of whether or not that was with the Reentry Success Center being a respondent also meant that they were responding on behalf of Rubicon. That part I'm not certain of, but yeah, that piece is missing. You're right.
So I guess we could go ahead and move to the questions on the survey. Well, maybe that might be premature. Let's go back up to the responses and what was the overall finding of the survey before we actually go to the questions. Primarily from going through the survey findings, just a brief overview. Housing, employment, and behavioral health was the common challenges that every respondent included. One of the other things that should be noted primarily was the COVID-19 being a factor in a diminished capacity for client engagement. So we have to include that in the reporting. So the critical areas: housing, employment, and behavioral health, with a concentration of client engagement. Also, looking at staffing being one of the also prevalent challenges. Insufficient access to mental health and SUD treatments and clinicians. Another thing that stuck out for me was obtaining accurate client contact information to support the client engagement. So I'm highlighting those things specifically so that as we move into looking at the survey questions, how we can preface future questions or being inclusive of the findings from the 2022 survey results, findings. Are there any questions? Anything sticking out for conversation that you'd like more information around? Hearing nothing. Let's take a look at page 9 of the survey. It says, what programs and services would you suggest we consider for future development or funding in your area? And once again, overall housing, mental health services, and SUD treatment continue to be high priorities for future development and funding amongst the respondents. In addition, enhancement of the pre-release planning process to better prepare an individual to re-enter the community, specifically regard to client employment and housing services, was noted. So moving to the last item, potential considerations and next steps. Given the results of this survey, the following next steps are worthy of consideration. 1, approaches that would allow for the county to hire and retain additional AODS and SUD and FMNC, forensic mental health clinician staff. Also expansion of mental health and SUD stabilization services once additional staff is available. Expansion of in-custody and pre-release planning services. Incentive, ongoing client engagement and staff retention. And last but not least, an analysis of the distribution of AB 109 funds to ensure alignment with the current needs of the community and programs. So I know this is an awful lot to kind of like take a look at and embrace. But with the information that we've kind of like highlighted, we can move into, I guess, the questions, because that's our specific goal, is to make sure that we're on time, on schedule, so that we can have a good response, hopefully one better than 2022 for 2023.
So Ozzy, looking at the appendix here for the first question, it does appear that Reentry Success Center and Rubicon programs, again, without any further digging into whether or not this was, I'm assuming that they answered as one agency, as one representative for both projects, for the Reentry Success Center and employment. That's my guess.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I just, I didn't see Rubicon. That's something that I'm always looking at places that I know and familiar with, but thank you for drawing my attention to that. So the first question, I guess we're moving into the conversation about the things that we'd like to keep and the things that we would want to maybe add. I think definitely we need to know the county that your agency serves. And question 2, 3, 2 is the type of agency. We'll keep that. Is everyone in agreement with keeping 1 and 2? Can I get a thumb? Okay. And number 3.
Can I just offer my 2 cents, and maybe Elisa could also step up and speak to their part of the county, but we're more moving along the lines of distinguishing Central County between Central and South County, because they are very distinctly different. Central being more Concord, Martinez, and Walnut Creek, that area, and South being, the San Ramon Valley below Walnut Creek, which is a pretty significant area. And then I know that there's a distinction between East County and Far East County. Just because of geographically, it's just very different. If you're in East County, you're not necessarily providing services to Far East County.
That's true.
And so I'm just wondering if there is a benefit, or, to adding that in to understand where perhaps the dearth of services really lie.
Thank you, Jill, for bringing that up. And yeah, we are interested in seeing how far East County is being serviced.
Yeah, because when you say both Central and East, you could just be talking about Concord and Pittsburgh and Antioch.
And our folks in Byron and Bethel Island might not be able to access as well.
Or even Brentwood. I mean, when you really look at geographically.
So Jill, am I hearing you say specifically, first of all, I have to understand that this is a question that the agency is going to have to answer. So are you saying that we need to include some specific verbiage where they have lines of demarcation for the areas that they're serving?
Yeah, so I didn't, so these are their responses, and I'm just wondering, was this a checklist or did they fill this in on their own, Patrice?
They fill this part on their own. So we could do check boxes and kind of force them to select the areas and include an extra box that says all the above.
Right, I think that would be ideal. Because there's lots of confusion, like some people consider Pittsburgh Central versus some people consider Pittsburgh East. And that way, if you're really kind of distinguishing, we can kind of clarify that.
And if it helps, when we state the region, we could put in parentheses like a listing of city names that we would consider dominant in those regions. And so that might help as well to narrow the focus of what people would select.
That's a great idea, Patrice.
Is there any other discussion for question number 3?
This is Tanya. I'm not sure if this would be the appropriate spot for it, but once they select the actual city, to ask them if they have the ability to expand, just so that we know if we could cover other areas that are currently not being served, or if we need to look for other resources in that area that covers areas that's not being covered.
Thank you for that, Tanya. Also, on page 12, there's a response said the survey won't allow me to check more than one box. So is that the position that they can only check one block, or we're going to extend it to where they can check more than one box if they're actually serving more than one specific county?
Oh.
Yeah, I have to look back at the format of this because they're saying check, but clearly the verbiage is all very different and distinct in some ways. But we could take a look at that and give folks more options so it's a little more clear.
So moving to item number 4. So I'm assuming that just because there is an area where there's quite a few lines that, excuse me, the specific agency and organization has room or bandwidth where they can include additional information. Is that how the survey is set up on this specific response?
So this one would have been a comment box where they could input their own language here.
I think this is a question that we definitely would like to keep. Is there any suggestions for maybe refining the verbiage?
I'm wondering if it would be cleaner and more concise and able to compare year over year if you actually make these checkboxes and then have a line for other. And that way it could be, because this is kind of all over the map. I mean, I don't think this is uncommon responses for what we've seen, you know, housing, mental health, employment, family reunification. And I'm just wondering if, you know, given the services that are offered through this AB 109 money, if those can be made into checkboxes and then have an other for anything else that you haven't thought of. Just a thought rather than so much writing, you know, having people come up and then maybe the verbiage is different than what the service is offered.
Thank you, Jill. That's a great suggestion. We know that there are several things that are standard, and then yes, definitely having a add-on things such as housing, mental health and employment, staffing, SUD services, employment could be standard boxes.
Right. So like transportation was exactly that. I mean, transportation from incarceration, transportation to and from a job. I mean, so there's, you know, lots of nuances in there to really nail down what is missing.
I was at West County on Monday and asked a question similar to this to the inmates. And to my surprise, a lot of them said that their challenge was going back to the community and it being familiar. Returning to the same house, returning to the same friends, returning to the same environment, and them going back to what they knew ahead of time. And so I don't know if we kind of want to add that, you know, it may be the community itself that is not working for them because it's familiar.
So I hear you saying, Tanya, that you'd like to also see a checkbox for returning to their community, their individual communities as an issue that they could respond to, and maybe having an area where they can add a specific comment as it pertains to their specific circumstances.
Yes, because if part of the problem is they're returning to their community and we keep returning to the community, we're going to keep getting the same results. And this came directly from the inmates that said that they did not want to be released to Richmond.
That's true. That's true. That's a common problem.
You know, LaTanya, you're raising something that's really interesting. It has me thinking, you know, these are coming from the perspective of service providers, right? Those who are providing the resources, and based on what they are seeing, which is really secondhand, well, their firsthand experience, well, secondhand to the firsthand experience of the individual, right? Who's actually living who's living the experience. But maybe it's worth, and I might be putting some extra work on my own hands, but what the who, maybe it's worth exploring and seeing if there's a possibility we survey folks who are in custody around what they feel that they would need, what trepidation they may feel too when it comes to their reentry process. That can maybe help it. So if we took those sort of responses compared to the responses we get with the service providers, maybe we're able to see where there's some potential overlap, as well as some potential other opportunities that providers may not have even considered. So that could be an opportunity there. And if I could push and nudge just a little further, you may want to consider that in place of doing this survey again with the same agencies who may likely give you the same responses. So you know, that's my guess, but who knows? Because there's other programs that are coming online and it may be a totally different scenario for providers. I'm not sure. But the one thing that's clearly missing and has been missing for years now that this survey has been provided is the actual voices from the folks who are in custody. So just something to toss out there. I
That's a
actually
great
would be
idea.
really excited to see something like that happening.
So I have a question to that. Thank you, Patrice, for that input. My question is, do we currently have CBOs in place that could actually facilitate that survey for us?
Absolutely. So one thing for certain is we have Jody Sikanita, who's the director of in custody programming there at the sheriff's office. She has attended CAB meetings many times, and she would certainly, I think, be a really great contact to help facilitate any surveys of folks that are in custody. We also have a number of different providers that receive full clearance, jail clearance, so they're able to go inside and they're able to do programming while they're there. So that's staff from the Reentry Success Center, that's staff from the Reentry Network at Health Right 360. We also have ALDS staff who do drug counseling and support inside treatment. Obviously GPS, so Game Plan for Success, that's administered through the Office of Ed. They're doing the pre-release planning with folks before they're released. So we definitely have a number of different agencies, both county and CBOs, that we could probably coordinate with on this effort to get some feedback from folks. And the other metric to this too is we can very easily get what's called the ADA, which is the average daily sort of count of individuals that are in custody at all 3 jails. So depending on the number of responses, we can measure that against the number of folks who are in custody and see how well of a response rate you get to. So there's some potential there for sure.
That sounds like a great endeavor and something that I think we should possibly pursue and really get the information from the lived experience firsthand. And moving forward on that, what would be our next step? Possibly from off the top of my head, I would probably suggest us having those providers give us an overview, come in and have a conversation with us to kind of like map out a plan of action for a in-house survey. And how do we proceed with that, Patrice? Do we need to put that on a next step agenda?
Well, I know today you guys are also going to look at your work plan. So maybe that's a first step to say that this is something you guys really want to work on, craft out maybe a potential timeline. You could do what we're doing just now in terms of developing a set of questions that you would like to ask of folks, and then in the background, I can make contact with the various agencies and essentially start off with the sheriff's office to see if they could support the dissemination of the survey and what's the best way in terms of collecting things of that nature, how they would fill it out, what sort of format or form, because it likely won't be an electronic survey, right? Or what we want as they meet with service provider staff, what we want staff to fill out the survey for them. If it was an electronic type of thing, we could kind of work through what might be the best approach for administering the survey and disseminating it and collecting responses. So I feel like there's a lot to tease out there. And I can certainly make sure that some of these folks are invited to the subcommittee meetings and kind of help provide some guidance on that.
Great. That sounds wonderful. Thanks. Really appreciate that. We're heading into a new direction, and that's really what we really want to do. We want to implement some changes and to really get to the crux of our situation so that we can have some responses and some credible responses and actually feel that we're actually helping the communities and not just talking about it, but actually getting the input. I see Jill's hand. Go ahead, Jill.
I was just going to suggest that whatever survey you do for those who are in our detention system, there's three questions in particular that could, from this, that I think would be significant to ask them in you know, just changing the verbiage to be the individual, just to see how it compares, like their needs versus what the CBOs think they need. And so that would be interesting for a side-by-side comparison. Like the CBOs think they need these when the individual is saying, really what I need is this. And I think there's 3 questions in particular from this survey that could be switched around a little bit to gather that info. And then of course there'll be other questions that'll come up.
So would you like to suggest, would you like to give us input on the 3 questions that you see?
Yeah, sure. Let me flip back through.
Don't leave us in suspense, Jill.
Yeah, no. The region of the county that they'd be returning to, came from returning to. And then the number 4, what is the most critical area of need for you to return to the community? You know, just change it into an individual question. What is the greatest challenge you face in returning to your community? It could be, you know, what potential areas do you see, you know, needing or something along those lines once you're in community? And then number 7, describe the barriers. What are the barriers to reaching, you know, your own personal goals? And what supports could you use in community? You know, and then number 8 is what programs and services would you suggest? It could be what programs and services would you like to see available? You know, and sort of along the lines of what are the barriers to get those services. And I saw the providers said one of the issues was healthcare, which I find is interesting. I would have liked to have delved more into that because healthcare is available to anyone who needs it. So I was just curious about like how is healthcare not available? You know, so it'd be interesting from the individual's perspective to see, is it that they're not connected to resources? Is it, you know, so just sort of really teasing out what gets in their way of success once they leave.
Okay.
Jill, can I ask you again if you could call out the question numbers that you're identifying that we could maybe flip around?
And the other question would be, what, if any of these CBOs are you know, or organizations or whatever, are you familiar with, and kind of get an idea, do they even know that Lao family housing exists? You know, kind of go through the AB 109 agencies. Number 3 would be the area that they're going back to. Number 4 is the most critical area of need upon returning. You know, number 5, you want to find out from the individual what is their greatest challenge. Number 7 is about barriers to reaching goals. And then number 8 is, you know, suggestions for programming that might be necessary.
Thank you.
And number 9, the programs that you're familiar with,
Yeah.
the organizations. Yeah.
And it would be super interesting to see if a majority of people have no idea that these organizations exist.
I think this is probably the greatest idea that's been put forward thank you, LaTanya, for bringing this to the forefront. And thank you, Jill, for really adding the meat to the gumbo. Seafood, crab and lobster.
It is gumbo season. I would love to have some.
I have a great little restaurant near me that serves all of that food, and now you guys are all making me hungry. People are walking by with bags of it.
Okay, so moving on, we're here at the responses, which is number 5. And
So one more thing, if I could note in the previous question, some of the responses, I noticed that there was some responses specifying a little bit in specifying the type of housing that is needed. So just want to uplift that, considering that that has been a call and a recommendation that CAB has been pushing for some time now about the need to sort of diversify the types of housing options available to this population. So again, from the provider's perspective, there's a need for more immediate transitional housing right after release. I saw sober living environments, obviously long-term housing, which I would guess that they are just simply meaning permanent housing. So there's a range there. So just wanted to lift that up.
so I just, excuse me for not knowing, I didn't do my homework. What the types of housing, I'm aware we have our housing, transitional housing. We have housing for individuals with substance issues. What other type of housing do we have beyond, for example, a person has gone through, has come out of they've come out of custody, they're released to a transitional house, and after transitional housing, I'm looking, from my own experience, having to go into what's considered just regular housing that's for everyone, and then that application process. So my question is, do we have listings of housing outside of transitional housing that has a success ratio for actually accepting individuals who have are felons, ex-felons? Because I know that can be a very touchy situation for housing. And if someone could add to it, housing outside of the transitional housing.
Yeah, so great question. Okay, buckle your seatbelts, everybody. So first things first, when someone is released from custody, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're released to a particular housing program. Okay, ideally, that's what, between all of the service providers and even Game Plan for Success, there is some coordination taking place. I will say that the Reentry Success Center has found some success in providing transportation from at the time of release for an individual to come to the Reentry Success Center, get connected and affiliated with the staff there, and start from there to do some of the service navigation coordination that they may need, including housing. But the and then there's the housing that's being provided through Blau, that for the most part is a very structured program that incorporates some employment elements as well. They provide some subsidized housing for a period of time and then work with that individual to move them into permanent housing. And throughout that time where they're with them, They are then gaining employment, gaining income, and slowly but surely moving into the direction where they can cover the full cost of their housing. So it's still technically transitional, but for a period of time, at least there is no contribution necessary from the client to their own housing. It is subsidized, right? Then you also have emergency shelter beds. That's the H3 AB 109 allocation, right? Where in the three shelters, right? Concord, Brookside. Is it three? No, two. I'm missing here. But anywho, there's a number of beds that are set aside essentially, or costs are covered for bed night stays for anyone that is on AB 109 probation. So just as a background, remember when a lot of these community programs were established, they were initially established to be dedicated services for individuals that were on AB 109 probation. Since then, there's the creation of this tier system, which is to say that for someone that might be on parole or felony general supervision, so felony probation, informal probation, court probation, or was just recently released, but they're not a supervised, they're not considered part of a supervised population. Pre-trial, right? So there's a number of different sort of categories where one might be involved or connected to the justice system. And if a provider who's receiving AB 109 funds have the capacity to both serve folks that are on AB 109 probation and can extend it out to others on the tier system, they are able to do so. The problem is with housing. Housing is oftentimes these are static numbers. There's only so many beds. And once they're filled, they're usually filled for a while, right? And that's not uncommon just across housing service provision in general. So that has always been sort of a challenge there. I will say that the reentry network, so separately, so here's another one, they have a subcontract with a transitional / sober living house that's dedicated for folks who go through the reentry network. Again, the reentry network is a reentry service hub. It's serving individuals returning back to East, Central, South, Far East places, right? So then some housing is made available to them as well. What is missing, I will say, so one, there's no shortage of sober living environments that are available. However, they may all not be funded specifically to serve reentry populations. I often get calls from SLE operators. I know Fatima, who's over AOD, also gets calls, and I also know that H3. So all of us as county entities, we will get calls from sober living environments. However, not every person that you would consider justice involved or reentry really needs that type of housing, right? Then you also have, so what is missing, I would say, is for individuals with co-occurring disorders. So if you have a mental health and a substance use sort of a challenge, there are at the moment no housing providers being funded to accommodate someone with those sort of needs. We also, specific to reentry population is what I'm saying. We also don't have permanent supportive housing that would go toward individuals, again, at high need that are in the, that you would consider justice involved or reentry. Those options aren't specifically targeted. Those options exist, but they're not specifically targeted to that population, right? They have to kind of be in the queue as any other individual in the county that might need those sort of resources. So all to say, it's kind of time for growth and expansion and an ability to be a little bit more strategic when it comes to housing folks who are returning from custody, and also acknowledging that that population has a variety of needs, one of which health issues and challenges will impact one's ability to access housing and to maintain and stay in housing, right? The conversation has been discussed, right, at CCP level. You guys have brought it up through your recommendations, but we just haven't moved the needle just yet. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for some innovation in this space and expansion where possible. You guys raised it with regards to the AB 109 excess funds. That's still a potential. Measure X funding is being made available. There's a current RFP right now for some homelessness prevention and other innovative efforts. So we're getting there, but not quite there yet.
Yes, I thank you for that, Patrice. It's a long way to go. Jill, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add to all of that. Yes, there's a long way to go, but yes, there's also a lot on the horizon. You know, with what Patrice was saying, that Measure X funding is not a small amount of funding. We also have care courts that'll be coming on next year, which is going to divert, hopefully, those struggling with mental health issues more away from the criminal justice system. There's a B-CHIP housing, which is the 3 grants that are going into recondition buildings into housing, permanent supportive housing in a variety of levels. So I think there's a lot on the horizon. The thing that I haven't seen really a deep dive done by CAB is, what is the ideal type of housing? You know, for certain segments of the population, those who are struggling with these referrals, struggling for these types of housing, what specifically does this justice system population need to answer these gaps? We already know that they can't get housing vouchers because of HUD regulations, so that keeps them from some of those housing options. But really, I guess, what is best practices out there to successfully transition individuals from our carceral system into community?
That is a good question, Jill. Thank you for, putting it back out there. I think that it's our challenge to find some adequate answers to that. And I think we're poised to do that. I think that we can begin making that difference. It's going to take us setting a framework and then others coming behind us to kind of like carry the work on. But at least we can begin and start helping that process. And that's what I would like to see with this committee this year, that we move forward and try to be creative and come up with some suggestions and ideas, and everyone feel free to bring forth some suggestions, some things that you've been thinking about, because this is where the ideas, you start with the ideas and work toward bringing it to fruition. But we have to start somewhere. And I think we've got traction right now, because CAB has come a long way. The last couple of years, I've seen some things happen, suggestions that went to CCP that they just really embraced and have been really championing CAB. And now that we have the momentum, let's keep it going and be as creative as we can be, and realize that we have some funding, little extra funding, but also the creativeness, because I'm not out in that specific area right now. I'm trying to project myself into these areas, but LaTanya and Rena, you guys are right there on the front lines, and you're actually really communicating with individuals, possibly on a daily basis. And, just let's get together and try to do something monumental to move this a little bit more forward, so we can leave some work for next year's people to do. Because this is how things happen. We have to start here with the ideas, and then on our work plan, then as we massage it and develop it, then next year, but then eventually it comes to fruition. And I just want to mention, in speaking about that, when I first came on board, the COLA increases and for our CBOs, and also identifying overages of money spent or underages of money spent, or some of the things Policy and Budget Committee really was working toward. And, you know, it was started in 1 year and it was presented, but it took a couple of years for it to come to fruition, but it came to fruition. It's been a part of, now it's part of what CAB and our subcommittee stand for, because we are the community and we are tasked with overseeing the funding and making sure that that delicate marginalized community receives the resources that it desperately needs, and that we stay on target and on track as we become innovators, because we get these ideas and we see these things when we go to the different forums. For example, Latanya, we went to the mental health forum, and there's so many ideas that come from that. And if we're in these spaces, then we can bring that information back to the subcommittee. We can even take a step further and do presentations from organizations that are doing the work that you would like to see CAB champion. So we have a responsibility for our communities. And I would like definitely to see us put our efforts to something that will be leaving a legacy for us. So with that being said, we're going to move on to our next question. We have what was the greatest challenging the program was facing, and looking here on capacity, AB 109 referrals. The biggest challenge our program is facing is the ability of transportation to and from our facilities. Our program serves individuals all over Contra Costa County. Housing service options for emergency housing, mental health services. I don't understand keeping retention rate high, but we are working on getting a better rate. Retentions. Participant consistency.
Yeah, so that would be in relation to having their participants in their programs continue to come back and stay involved and stay engaged in the service. So this particular agency, whoever responded, may be experiencing, drop off of engagement once a participant is enrolled.
Probably a lot of that had to do with the COVID. Hopefully things change as we move into 2023.
I will say though, having used to being on the service provider side of things, it's not uncommon, and it's really sometimes very tricky to maintain engagement of participants as they, especially when oftentimes they come to the provider with really critical needs that are really immediate at the time. And once those issues are addressed, still staying engaged for the sake of, building community, or even to support them in moving for additional goals that are more long-term, or that might require not as much, what's the word for it? It's not crisis. Nothing is at a crisis. Nothing needs to be stabilized, but yet it's still a goal that is important to them, especially when often they've stated that in the beginning. And so there's sometimes some drop off. And it could be a whole host of reasons why that may take place. But we also oftentimes find too, that even if we experience drop off, we sometimes see the same clients come right back around later. So there's a gap in time or a gap in service provision for some participants. And sometimes that's to be expected. But then it means we have to reorient our thinking around what's considered success rates, completion rates, things of that nature, when this is a type of population that requires really ongoing relationship building, building rapport so that they could feel comfortable and safe enough to come back whenever they're ready to engage in services again. So, but it's certainly an issue that's worth exploring further, particularly by that agency that might see that as a challenge for them.
Definitely, Patrice, I really understand the community and the individuals involved in the community. The mindset, it's more of a survival mode. They can't thrive because they don't have the food, shelter, and clothing, adequacy, feeling good about themselves, or whatever is going on. And I know it's very delicate, and it really takes special people with a passion, because you can really get very upset and disenfranchised when you're seeing that it's not working. But I think people who are really committed to this process, are heroes, because it takes a real depth of passion to work with this community. I understand it, but for the grace of God, there goeth I. I've had every scenario imaginable in the criminal justice system and re-entering. I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to feel like I'm discriminated against. I have real implicit bias issues because, and I understand that. And that's why I'm here today, is because as an advocate, making sure that there's some who really want to get out of that grip, and staying the course and making sure that there are outlets, there are resources for the individuals that want to come out of this grips of homelessness and really get their life on track, reunification. It's a passion, and you have to really love what you do and want to see the best for people, and just keep on staying optimistic. And, we have this is a hard job. It really is. And my hat's off to those of you who are in that position. I just really got on the other side where I can really be a voice, be an advocate. And actually, when I talk to people and I understand where they are, but as I said, that was me. And we, collectively we can do a lot, but we have to really start somewhere. And I'm just so proud of everyone that sits at these tables. I'm very honored that a space and a safe place has been afforded for us to come and get together and really talk, and that everyone's voice is valued. So moving on.
So Ozzy, just really quickly, just doing a time check. We're at 12:14, almost 12:15. And I know we have a few other items to go through too. So just wanted to put that on your radar.
Okay. So I guess we'll move through our survey, and ask the question which of these items that we're going to flush out to continue on our process. So number 6, what potential areas do you see your program growing into? Do we agree that this is something that we should keep as part of the survey? Giving the providers a space where they can see a vision for themselves and their organization?
Yes, because we also want to make sure that their programs will also meet the needs of the people that they're serving. So if they're not currently doing it, if they're going to be doing it within the next 3 to 6 months or year, we know if this is where we want to allocate money to.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we're going to keep number 6. Number 7. Please describe any barriers that your agency experiences when seeking to reach program goals and objectives. What supports could help your agency reach those goals and objectives? I think,
That's an important question too. I agree.
yes.
Sorry.
And number 8, what program and services would you suggest we consider for future development or funding in your area? There was awful lot of feedback for this specific question. Number 8.
I like it if we can also include and why, so that they have a clear understanding of why they're adding these programs and speak to the need of it.
Would you want to add a number 9 to that, a 9th question where they can be more specific with boxes they could check, maybe including some specifics and then leaving an area where they can go ahead and exaggerate on or add whatever it is that they would like to include?
Yeah. Yes.
Now, what we could do is rephrase the question to say, instead of a direct asked questions, what we could say is, please describe what, if any, programs and services you would suggest we consider for future development or funding in your area, and why, or something to that, or something. We could play around with it where we could request that they give some description of or maybe we say, and the need, if I'm hearing you correctly, Latanya, and the need that it would feel, or I can't find the
Yes,
word.
so I'm just
right.
really asking them
Something.
to validate their response. So if they're saying, we're going to do more housing for mental health, I would want them to have something to support, not that it's not needed, but for them to have the education or the resources to support what they're doing and why, and not just say what they're going to do.
Okay, thank you for that, Latanya. So we have a few more minutes left in our time together today.
Ozzy, Elisa has her hand up.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Elisa.
Thank you. Just a idea that I wanted to run by the group, because looking at this, next time this comes around in 24, or if it's 25, we're going to talk to people that are actually being released instead of looking at the providers. One thing to look at is the improvements that have happened in the time span between the last survey and this one. And a question that you might want to ask is, especially with the things that are coming online through Measure X and AB 109 and the other utilities that are going to be there in the future. Have you seen improvements in the categories that we've consistently seen, which is housing, employment, behavioral health? Like, has your program been able to make strides in addressing the need there? Just because if it's always a need, are we making progress on addressing it, even though it's still, a need that the population has?
Absolutely. I like that. Definitely. Thank you for that. So we would probably include that as number 9. Have you seen any improvement in housing? The 3 areas where the challenges were?
Yeah. Or has your organization been able to, improve their program or programming in those areas?
Thank you. Any other suggestions? So a question to you, Patrice, is it something that we could hold this and come back and revisit it, just giving us time to think over, kind of like, have a moment to think about it and then come back again and revisit it our next meeting to make sure that everything has been included in case we have some afterthoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. What I could try to do then in time for your next meeting is maybe just do a list of the questions, just based on what I heard today. And then you can compare that to the questions of the previous survey. And if you guys feel like that's spot on or needs to be augmented a little bit more, then you can work from there.
Okay.
And then separately too, I don't know if you want to include this as well. Would you like, based on what I heard today, maybe a list of the questions that would be posed for folks that are in custody as well? So then you can look at both.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. So with our survey, and we'll be reviewing it again at our next meeting, the next item listed is our work plan. And because of the time constraint, we can take a look at it again. We did a lot of discussion on it at our last meeting. There is one other thing that I had thought about since our last meeting. We had kind of talked about having presentations before the full cab from our specific CBOs. I wanted to throw something out here to see how receptive it is. I was wondering if any one of us would be willing to take an opportunity to visit our CBOs or our agencies, to make an actual in-person visit. And I'm saying that, and I would be willing to role model that, what I'm speaking of. And it's in line with another item that we're supposed to talk about, but we haven't got to it yet. But I would like to go to one of our CBOs, not specifically with an appointment, but actually to go and really, like a secret shopper, to actually see how receptive I'm received, how I'm received, how well they can help my situation that I might come in with, whether it's for me personally whether it's I'm coming for a family member that might have an issue and I'm just kind of like looking at their organization. And I'm doing this because, and saying this because if you make an announcement, people are going to be ready and poised to receive you. But if you just come in inadvertently off the street unannounced, then you can better get a feel of the environment. Even better is if there's a person there for services, if you can just have a casual conversation with them. You know, I'm thinking about this because we want to be able to make sure that individuals are receiving what they need and that they are being received and spoken to, talk to, and given some type of encouragement, some type of hope. And I know that's not people's really their job, but it kind of is, you know, when you're in these types of positions, because we really want to uplift individuals who are in crisis and give them not only the services, but also a part of us and that part of compassion and that humanness that we all need, specifically when we're in a survival mode. You know, when we're in a fight or flight type of emotional stress, we want to be able to know that we're being received and we're being helped authentically. And that's another reason why one of my platforms is the implicit bias and cultural competency, because we have all types of individuals and we all have specific biases. I have a lot of them. I had a lot of them, and I had to do a lot of work so that I could have lenses that were not full of distractions and not bringing my own personal issues, but being able to be there and be receptive of other people. So I'm just throwing that out there. I'll be willing to model that, but I'd like some feedback from our board, from our committee members.
Well, if I might, because ORJ does serve as the contract administrator on you guys, well, on behalf of the county for all of those for all of the programs. Some of the elements you're lifting up, we do tend to look at in terms of the contract monitoring aspect. So I would recommend this instead, because what you don't want to do is set up a situation where it may feel like a got you kind of thing. When a lot of these organizations, a good chunk of their staff are folks with lived experiences. So cultural competency is pretty strong across our CBO contractors. What programs and services are members of CAB? I can't say if it's programs and services specifically, but members of CAB have done in the past, this was pre-COVID days, was that they would arrange a site visit and they would actually have an interview session with some of the staff there at the program. And I can remember this because I was on the receiving end of that when I was working as a service provider. I wasn't necessarily given any interview questions up front, but I was, you know, a CAB member reached out, said, hey, we'd love to come by, check out your program and, you know, ask you a few questions just to learn more about you guys' work. And I was more than happy to welcome them in. It wasn't a problem at all. So I think that will be a better approach, so that way you're maintaining rapport and relationship with the programs themselves. I would also recommend even requesting to sit in on any of their, whether they have groups with folks, whether it's some sort of direct case management meeting that they may have with clients. That is also often welcome, so that you can see their service provision in real time. So I just want to caution that piece there, because they do a lot of really great work and they are very intentional about their work. And so I wouldn't want there to be a scenario where they feel like there is a hunt for something. And I know that's not your intention. I know your intention is to get an understanding where there could be some potential gaps, and is it actually being addressed? I think if you ask those questions very directly, they will give you very transparent answers.
Well, thank you for that, Patrice. Well, it is 12:31 and we have come to the end of this session.
Okay.
I see a hand. Crawford? Can't hear you, Crawford. You're on mute.
There we go. I'm sorry. Since we're just coming to the end of your session, just wanted to say that it's a pleasure just being a fly on the wall and listening to your group, your standing committee, and particularly to Latanya and Rena, being first timers, so to speak. And really enjoyed just listening to them, and many thanks to Jill and to Alyssa. Hey, you've got a great start, and just wanted to share that with you, and that's all.
Thank you, Crawford, and thank you, Jill, and thank you, Alyssa, and thank you so much, Patrice, Crawford, Latanya, and Rena. Thank you tremendously for being here and making us a success. Crawford, is that your hand up again? Okay, well,
So Ozzy, actually, I have my hand up for one quick thing, just before we close out in terms of next steps. Should we bring back all of the remaining agenda items for the next meeting, in addition to the list of survey questions or the list of updated survey questions for providers and potential questions for surveying folks in our detention facilities?
absolutely. That means we'll have a full agenda, discuss number 6, number 7, and bringing back the survey and for the providers and for individuals in custody. Yes, next steps. And our next meeting is on March 16th. And we'll be in person at 50 Douglas Street. That should be fun. Thank you so much for attending. The meeting is adjourning at 12:33.
Thank you all.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.